Okay, so today we are going to start, I'll start over. Today we are going to start working through the framework to talk about this whole initiative around sharing stories and how stories are part of absolutely everything that we're doing. And we will be following the Catalytic Thinking framework in doing so, and I thought it would be helpful to just go over that. This is a color version of what you guys are used to saying. Whatever the presenting situation is, the first thing we do is we listen. We think about the for whoms, and we're listening to who will be impacted by, who will be affected by whatever it is we do. And then listening for what do they want? What do they have to build upon? What is important to them? Their outcomes, their strengths, their values. At which point we will define what is the highest potential outcome, what will our working on sharing stories make possible for each of those individuals. And then we will back out what are the conditions that need to be in place for that. Our actions will come from that. I will share with you guys who are not seasoned in playing with this in team efforts, that the place that we all tend to go as humans is this action place. We have a million ideas, each of us, before breakfast. And you'll notice that that comes last rather than first. And obviously the last is, I loved what you were saying, Rebecca, about the money, how are we going to pay for it versus what do we all have together? But really, there will be several times during the next several meetings where there will be gentle reminders that whatever ideas we come up with are fabulous. We'll put them in the parking lot and we'll talk about them once we've established what the conditions are for success. So we will be working today in this area right here, talking about what this initiative will make possible and for whom. And with that, I am handing this over to my colleague, my co-conspirator.
Okay. And before we jump into that, and thank you for the setup and the reminder to all of us on the roadmap of we are here. If anyone has any other thoughts and reflections that have come, bubbled forth from you since we were last together, maybe where did your brain go after we got off that great first meeting, or 10 minutes ago with the emails that came through. If there's anything that's standing out to you from there that we can bring forward into this conversation.
I feel like my brain is, I think it's all good, but I feel like my brain first, it goes to the, I've done enough of these types of meetings with Hildy that I know that when my brain of like, ooh, let's try this, let's do this, let's remember to do this, that she's like, okay, that's all great. And just what she said, like, we'll get to that when we get to that. And so I was looking forward to this reminder and knowing that I don't have to stress out about solving any problems. And so that is really great. And then the stuff that both Cindy and Ryan have shared, like the additional stories, pieces that pointed to external stories that may have nothing actively to do with creating the future, and are examples of this. My brain kind of went like, oh no, there's way more to capture. So I had one of those like, this is so great, and oh my freaking God, how are we gonna capture the entire world in the universe in basically a database? Like, that freaked me out. And then I was like, oh yeah, I don't have to, I can just calm down and come to the meeting. So that's what's been happening since our last meeting for me.
Thank you.
I was craving a model. even though my philosophy is sometimes against models. But I was thinking a lot about things very much the way that Laura just explained. And I think I need to relax a little bit. And I think that there's a lot more to see. I'm pretty new to all this. So I'm just gonna get familiar with the model, but I now see that I kind of saw before, but I didn't see it in that context. So just gonna see what happens.
Thank you.
One of the interesting things, and I've been teaching this now and working with people who are practicing and then getting deeper and deeper in their practice of using the framework. And one of the things that happens over time, we used to have a big sign in the room that when we teach in person that said, trust the process, trust the people in the room. And what winds up happening after a while is you get to a point where you get to exactly the place where you were talking about, Laura, where your head's going, I know, and then you go, oh, wait a minute, we have a framework for this. And you can breathe just a little bit, and it takes a lot of the out, because the other side of our tendency to come up with actions, and we just all do it. I mean, it's the way our brains work. We just come up with it. The other side of that is that we also frequently feel frustrated, anguished, anxious, pick your not great emotional word, when we can't see the path and we can't figure out what it is. And we know that, for instance, it might be a database, but I can't figure out the path from here to that database. And it's that whole thing in the catalytic decision making video about how we can't see it, and it's that inability to see that causes anxiety. We're so visually based. And so the more we can, it's why we use the visual of the framework a lot, the more that we can just remind, oh yeah, we're going to get there, and it's okay. Some people in the beginning also feel anxious and frustrated because, damn it, we're supposed to be working on actions. And why are we talking about all this other stuff? And again, you rest into it. It really becomes a place where you can rest. And it's practice. How about you, Cindy?
I mean, I found it so interesting because coming from theater and seeing examples of people trying to collaborate, although there's usually a hierarchy, it was like, oh, this is just kind of interesting, that sharing that article, and then to hear how much of an impact it seemed to have was really fun. It was really interesting, and I think I spend a lot of time telling people or trying to express how the arts help life, and it's nice to see that in action. I don't know. That's also a really interesting situation that I shared, but it was really fun to see how it made people spiral a little bit in different directions. And as someone who's very, from what you were just saying, Hildy, someone who's like, I'm covering up my planner right now because it's like, I'm so action oriented, and I think part of what I like about this process is slowing down. And I can see it helping me no matter in all these situations. So
I think I love the story for, I guess, all of what was in the story, and then also all of the reality that these stories are all around us. There currently is we don't know of any mechanism there's no central repository to share, to learn, we don't know of any two-way thing in the world right now that's gathering, adding to, learning from, connecting people. to the things that make a world a better place, to people experimenting. And the fact that we can point to all these stories and continue to unpack them as catalytic thinking in action. We can put the language around what was in that story. Like even in the story, I was thinking about all the people who, when you think about the continuum of potential, are ready to step in. That's why there were people who were hesitant. That's why someone was jumping up and down about trying this new stuff. So I think about the power of taking things that aren't us created and applying the filter or the framework to them to then almost like tease out and highlight, see, this is what was in action here. This is what, so people can start already looking at their world and be like, that's why things always go well on that team I'm on. Or that's why it always feels good when I'm having coffee with her. So people also start to get strength from the stuff that's already being in their life and not necessarily feeling so hopeless about everything sucks or whatever kind of, they can see something and start to celebrate in themselves and learning without even maybe saying, I'm here to learn. Yet the reality is they're learning.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the thing that Anne Vermel and I were starting to talk about a year or so ago, which I would still love to do, the Catalytic History Project, which was looking at key moments in history through the lens of catalytic thinking to see what really happened in the civil rights movement, what really happened at the formation of the NEA, what really happened in the blah, 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 when you add the layer of those three core questions. Oh, wow. So they were aiming at what they really wanted. And, oh, they were building on the strengths of everybody. And, oh, yeah. And that's certainly not our stories. That's 100 and 200 and 500 years ago. What happened? The book, Better Angels of Our Nature, that really tracks the human progress. Again, over and over and over for millennia, what has brought us forward. So, that was a big drumbeat for me. Two other things. One, I'm noticing the number of places. Rebecca, you mentioned that there is nowhere where we can both contribute to and get stories when we need them. And I'm noticing in especially the community that Creating the Future has for consultants. And this is a community, Ryan, that is on Facebook, and it is, it's not necessarily consultants who even know anything about catalytic thinking. It's just consultants who consult to basically anybody who's doing social change. So it could be their coaches, it could be their consultants, working with whether it's nonprofits or social enterprise or governments, but it is consultants who are consulting to people doing social change work. And I'm noticing how often people in that community are asking for stories. I'm going into a group and I'm going to be talking about X. Does anybody have a story I can use as an example? And, you know, it came up again today. Mark was asking, you know, does anybody have examples of questions that you've used when you do X? And so it really is just noticing how often we're asking for stories when we're trying to accomplish something. And the power of the stories. And then, you know, I've been so in the doing place, which is the other, you know, sort of this, you asked, what have we been sort of thinking about since the last time? And again, because I'm really diving into a lot of writing, looking at storytelling structure. So really in the weeds of the doing, the absolute opposite of where we're starting today, in the absolute weeds of the doing, and I'm just fascinated by it. So I'm just personally enjoying busting a lot of assumptions, looking at both the breaking down of what works, what really is going on, and again, it's the what's really going on. When a story is effective, listening to people whom I appreciate, taking some of the master classes that are offered on Masterclass, and just reading a lot of the sort of myth busting things about, well, everybody knows a good story is X. And then the answer is no, that's not necessarily true. So yeah, I've been, that's sort of where I've been, is observing and enjoying.
Have you read about the heroine's journey? Okay.
Yeah. There's so many wonderful, I've been diving back into a lot of those alternative memes to the hero's journey, and looking at, all you need to do is type in alternatives to the hero's journey into Google, and great stuff. And just, the fact that culturally, and it's stuff when we get down to talking about conditions that need to be in place. And Laura, you mentioned this at the end of the last meeting, being inclusive about who's in the room to both have this conversation and especially whose stories are being told by whom, told to whom, interpreted through whose lenses. And so much of those, what we've been taught about the quote hero's journey, is one way of looking at things through one cultural lens, and specifically one gender lens. And just, yeah, there's great stuff out there. I found one, Cindy. I'll send you the link. I'll send you guys links. But I found one that looked at 4 different, it's one that I come back to a lot, 4 different cultural memes that are different than the hero's journey. So what does story look like in India? What does story look like? I think one is Central Africa. I don't remember what the other 2 are. It's been a while, but and I'll send you the link. But it's fascinating that that you wouldn't recognize story. The line that always resonates with me about the India, because the guy uses, you will like this, Cindy, the guy uses visuals of it. So he draws what story looks like in India and what story looks like in because, we're so used to the drawing of the hero's journey. And the line that I just always remember is, if you watch a Bollywood movie, you're like wondering where the story is, because it starts out as a love story, and then it's a war story, and then it's a we need to rain story, and then they have to dance, and then they have to so yeah. So I'll send those things. I'll send links, I promise.
So something I heard from everyone, and I know it's something I feel internally as well, is that like the desire to create the something, the desire to, to get to the actions. We want to get to the actions. And I've been noticing a lot lately also in myself, in context to the whole, when I don't have context to the whole of whatever it is, like it could be for this project, or it could be something I'm in conversation with someone else, I get very anxious because I don't even know how to respond or participate in the conversation if I don't kind of get a whole scope of where am I, like a roadmap. And what you're asking me actually has tentacles into lots of other things. So I'm mindful of myself in situations that I very much notice my undies get in a wad really fast if I don't have context. So today, in working with the framework and starting where we always start by reaching for, giving why, reaching for what is possible. What will our working on this initiative make possible? And the initiative is that whole big thing that we've talked about of the documenting, the filing of, the sharing of, the contributing of, the learning from, the connecting people to people and people to resources. And the resources could be how I share my story, as well as what are all the different types of assets of story you have. And then we also ask the for whoms, and the for whoms is often, I'm sorry, I feel like my mic is really jacked up today. So Acknowledging it, yet I'm in a pinch here. So
just keep talking. We'll listen around it.
So in the what, there's what this will make possible, and the importance of asking right alongside and for whom, because very quickly it's very often that we could just start with us or who we think maybe. Well, we could talk about people. I'm like, well, what kinds of people? You know, people who are seeking stories, people who have been rapidly knocking on the door with Creating the Future, saying, I need you to give me stories because I want to spread this in the world. And the first thing people are asking me for is evidence. And we know that story is evidence. So by citing all the for whoms, and this isn't saying that we are trying to guide how they will be acting or decisions to make, yet if we make this big, beautiful thing, it's going to be impacting people all over, whether they're asking for it or not. So it's best to include the richest list of all these for whoms, and one for whom is always creating the future. Our mission is a for whom, and a for whom is each one of us. It's the team collectively. It's every single one of us. What does working on this make possible for you? So we'll go through, and often it's an easier kind of ramp onto the conversation sometimes to start with citing all the for whoms. And then we can talk about what it will make possible for this for whom. We can say, okay, who do we want to start with first? So I turn to all of you and asking, what will our working on this initiative make possible for whom? So who are the for whoms that come to mind?
I've been thinking a lot about that. And have listed some, so maybe that can start kicking some things off. One is people with stories to tell. You know, Rebecca, you told 27 stories in one awesome. You know, you have stories to tell. It's like, okay, this will clearly, people whose individual lives could change if they hear that story. And I was sort of thinking in layers. I'm looking for a story for me. I don't know that I'm looking, when I get online, I'm not necessarily typing in story for blah, but I may be looking for how to deal with an ornery teenager who won't eat anything I put in front of them. So I'm looking for something personally for me. I'm not necessarily looking for it in the form of a story, but when I hear that somebody on the internet, so it must be true, somebody on the internet fixed that exact thing with something that I think could work, we're not thinking of that in terms of a story. I'm not searching for a story. I'm searching for an answer. So it's people whose lives could change. And then the ripple from there was people who will carry those stories forward to tell to others. So when you said evidence before, Rebecca, one of our fellows, since taking the class in 2013, so this is 5 years, has been saying, because she works in an environment where they're constantly trying new things, but in order to get funded, need to have the evidence. She's constantly saying, I need stories, I need evidence, I need evidence, I need stories, I need evidence. But also people who would carry those forward may be people who are writing the e-journal or people who are writing blogs. It could be teachers in any of our classes may. So again, I was sort of lumping all of those people together into the group of people who want the stories because they're going to tell them to somebody else. So there's people who will be impacted personally, and then there's people who will, you know, me on a stage, or any of you who are on a stage telling stories. Those were the three big ones I came up with immediately. People with stories to tell, people whose lives could immediately be impacted, and then people who will tell the stories to others.
One thing that just popped up is I hear a lot, like people who have could be a crazy idea and could be exactly what someone else is needed. That kind of thing comes up a lot in my circles, like, oh, this might be a crazy idea, but, and then we're like, actually, that's perfect.
Yeah, to find out you're not crazy. And in fact, there's someone out in the world who's put that into action, that thought into action.
Or who needs exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
And actually, I shouldn't use the word crazy. That's not a good way to put it.
Oh, but we say it all the time.
Yeah.
I actually think there's kind of, my brain sort of mashed up what Cindy just said and what Rebecca responded with, which was, I heard Cindy say people who have a crazy idea and say it anyway, and then people who need that crazy idea. And then there's people who actually already tried that crazy idea and they are affirming
It's not crazy.
Yeah, so there's like 3 different people in there.
Yeah. I think there's also, and I'm thinking very specifically about creating the future's mission, and when we are targeting, because frequently we're not. Frequently we're just telling what we've seen work, and anybody can access that. But when we are targeting specific programs, we are looking at people that we've sort of lumped into a category of influencers, that we're not seeing our primary audience being one person at a time taking classes. We're seeing, as just an example, we're seeing the audience being a company, a government office, a foundation, a consultant, an academic institution, that for every touch point we have, 50 people hear it, or 100 people hear it, and I'm thinking of those maybe that's the word, institutional bodies that are also looking for stories, and in part to tell them to other people, but also to ignite the approach that they may take to something. So it's sort of the blend between people who are going to use it themselves. It might be an institution that's going to use it themselves, but they're thinking very differently than somebody who's home trying to figure out what to feed their teenager.
I'm thinking of what you just said sparked for when you're looking to ignite an approach, because I think given the way we as humans often think, it goes to that doing place. So say we have the germ of an idea, and we're going to follow probably the path of an idea-driven strategy instead of causality-driven. So people right away go looking for examples because they want to replicate the doing. So people, like, right, even when I'm talking with these women in my community about our elders, they are so quick to try to find a thing so that we can replicate the thing. So I think that's a key search people are often going to look for is, I want a model of this so I can bring it to my work team, to my community, to whatever. So that's the way the brains of our brains we've been born to be into systems that make us go looking for replicating doing stories.
Yeah, that's powerful.
I want to say right now that perhaps this is crazy, but I feel like you guys have been watching me for my whole life, and now you're like having a conversation. And like, I like it a lot, and so I'm just gonna stay quiet for a while.
Yeah, we're all very much the same, we humans. You know what else? And some of this is going to be creating the future, some of this is not, but it's sort of off of that institutional and then the doing thing and the replication, the idea thing. But people who are actually developing programs, so I was thinking specifically of creating the future, that people who are developing, whether it's our educational programs or, you know, again, it could be the journal, it could be our communities, it could be whatever. But I think that stories make a big, big difference to people who are actually doing the development of a product, a program, yeah, a thing that others will consume.
As a facet of the content? Are you like that this or?
No, that's a group of people. That's a for whom is people who are actually developing, and it may be under the institutional, but I'm sort of picturing, who, you know, who will this initiative make stuff possible for? Is people specifically at Creating the Future, who are creating all these different programs. So it's more narrow, and I guess probably has to do with our mission.
What about, well, this might be too much of my trying to push the direction that my brain does, but what about people who need to hear the stories that maybe on a completely different path, and they, you know how when you learn something, you're like, oh my, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like those people that don't even know this exists, and they might actually be doing something that's harmful to the planet or to somebody or whatever because they are uneducated about this option. But that might be me being too judgy.
Well, what that's raising for me is the continuum of potential and both Ryan and Cindy, I don't know how far you've gotten through everything, Cindy. I know that you're taking it again, but Ryan, I know that you haven't gotten through everything. When you are completely done and feel like you can take a breath and say, yeah, I took that course. I at least get a sense of everything. There's a 1-hour video on what we call the continuum of potential. I don't know the extent to which we've shared that with each of you, but it is a deeper form of catalytic listening. It is asking the question, if we're going to meet people where they are, how do we know where they are? And where is where? And what it realizes is that everybody is at a different point along a continuum of reaching for their own potential. We frequently hear people talk about not being ready, and frequently ready has that judgy feel, Laura, of you're not ready to do what I think you should do. But when we look at it through the lens of our own potential, and that regardless of, this is entirely focused on behavior. So if some of us are at one spot in one particular behavior, perhaps, you know, eating more healthy, and some of us are at a completely different, and the same person could be in a different spot in terms of heading into the next thing in my career. But that we're all at different stages along a continuum of what we are personally ready to step into for our own potential. And it's what's occurring to me is that layer has to be on top of everything, because that's sort of where that took me, Laura, is that sense of what is the story that will help create conditions for someone in a if only stage, if only this, if only that, to open the door to them seeing, oh, that hasn't worked the past 1,700 times I've tried it, and et cetera. So I think it's just another layer. It's probably a condition for success, is that we meet people where they are with stories that will create conditions for them.
That's really a big layer, because I'm thinking of often, Hildy, when you speak and you prepare for the room, knowing that you don't know who's in the room. It's no different with this thing. We don't know who's going to come to this thing, like whatever the thing is that they click on, and we don't know where they're going to be on the continuum of potential. So there's, the different mediums that people consume in, as well as the language that's used and what's included in the content-wise, so that somebody who is at the if only stage isn't going to be like, this is a bunch of crap. Like, will there still be something valuable there for the person who is so frustrated and stuck? And there'll also be something, someone over here is like, yes, I knew it. So it's even, I guess, the complexity of asset, if it's at its highest potential, will blend both of those.
And may be 3 different stories. The same story told in 3 different ways. What I did with my teenage son and 3 things you can do, that's the if only people. What I did with my teenage son and the thinking that went into that, so that you can ask yourself different questions, completely different. And it could be the exact same topic. And
that speaks to when we talk about leveraging any asset we have for maximum impact, is a bunch of people who would delight in parsing the raw footage in lots of different ways, like to maybe ingest the story, you could say, and then what are the different ways we can share this out in the world, medium wise, and the 3 tips to tame your unruly teenager, like you just said, Hildy, is, but there's humans who will see the asset for what it is, to repackage and repurpose it in lots of different ways.
My writer head just exploded. That if I had a group that I would drink with once a week for a couple of hours, that would take one story and parse it out to all the different audiences that we're talking about, that's like that would be like nirvana for me. That would be so fun.
Well, and I think that what you just said points to, like, you are a big for whom in this, as far as we're creating this to support you, the founder and the dreamer upper of this initial stuff. So how, that's a big piece of it. And then, we've talked about in previous calls about, like, what is, when I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, we have like 17 times more work to do before we can get it out there. But then I remember, oh yeah, it's not just 5 of us. It's like, okay, then we can dream up some way of doing this where those extra 2,000 people will be welcome to come on in, have a giant Zoom call with Hildy where she tells a story, and then divvy up all the ways to do it, that they're going to do it. So yeah, I think that not just you, but everyone within who is doing this work is a big for whom, and how can we create something that best supports that work.
And just because I think it would be really fun to take 17 different ways to tell a story doesn't mean that we don't take the story and tell the damn thing and move on.
Yeah, but I'll bring that wine to that party.
Don't you?
This is all just coming back to something that happened like yesterday. I was listening to a podcast, and it's a pundit, basically, it doesn't matter, but he was doing a show at Harvard, and he was a couple minutes into it doing like Harvard student related jokes, and then he was like, how many people here are Harvard students? And it was maybe 5%. And how many aren't? And it roared. And I could hear him clicking, like, I don't have this material, you know. And like it changed, and he had co-hosts, so they figured it out. But like, you know, it's that could have been solved by
Yes.
a one question to answer survey that when you buy a ticket, you know.
Well, and it can also, so you don't always know who's going to be in the room, and you don't always have the ability to survey, but we can ask these questions in preparation. I use this framework exactly as you saw it in that graphic, probably 7 times a day, easily, for everything. And I want to very specifically get to what you were talking about, Cindy, because this is, I think it's another for whom, and I don't know exactly how to label it, but let me just, so Dimitri and I were doing flowcharts of the entire survey course that we just invented. We were going to do a broad brush flowchart, and then Rebecca and I were going to spend time really doing a deep dive to make sure that we've got checklists and templates for absolutely everything. And when we were doing the flow charting, we took the major components, said, okay, people somehow arrive at a description, a learning opportunities page, and they click on a registration, and they get into the classroom page. So we had these big chunks. And for each of those big chunks, we asked the first 2 questions. What will this chunk make possible, and for whom? And so they arrive at the learning opportunities page, and the first place we go is, oh yeah, that's just a cute way of saying sales page. That's what people would, you know, this is just a promo page. Let's get real. You guys are just using language. Isn't that cute? So we asked, what does this learning opportunities page make possible, and for whom? So we listed the for whoms, and we listed all of the different for whoms of all of the different people we wanted to take the class. And then we took a deep breath and said, probably 95% of the people who come to this thing will not take the class. What does this make possible for them? And went, whoa, it really becomes a learning opportunities page. Maybe they can learn something about catalytic thinking that they didn't know, or maybe they can, whatever it is. But the aha that, oh, wow, 95, easily, maybe more, % of the people who come to this page will not click. What does this page make possible for them? And we had the exact same thing happen when Dimitri was putting out a note that, again, if you're not using the framework, where we go, he was putting out a note that was the very first one during the beta, the very first beta that was going to help people figure out how to get into the live discussion. And he was thinking of it, because he's a tech guy, he was thinking of it as the tech note, and how he was going to tell everybody, well, here's how you get on Zoom, and if you want to be in the call, and if you want to be in the video, and if you want to just, and here's how the chat works, and he had like scribbled all of this out in his brain. He knew all the stuff that he needed to approach. And then we high potentialed it and said, okay, what will this note make possible, and for whom? And I saw 2 big for whoms. I saw the people who will attend live and the people who won't attend live. And if you took the normal tech note that you get going into a webinar, it's all about the assumption you're going to be there. But easily 50% or more of people at webinars don't be there for the live thing. They're there watching the recording afterwards. So what does this note make possible? And one of the things that you'll see, Ryan, coming up, but you may have noticed, Cindy, in the note that comes out prior to every live discussion, is it says, this note is for you if you're going to be there live and if you're not going to be there live. And if you're not going to be there live, click to the bottom and you'll see because again, it is incorporating that assumption of, oh, people are not necessarily going to do what we think they're going to do. And I love the only 5% were from Harvard. I'm just, it's like, if we make that assumption, so what does that mean for our assumption about who's reading this, who's going to do something about it, who's telling the story to whom, how we frame it. Sorry, I just sort of went off on that because it was so glaring for us. And there were two huge ones.
Hildy, I have, or maybe Hildy and Rebecca. So I was just looking back over as you were talking about our for whom so far, and pretty much it's everybody on the planet. So how does that help us? Like, because we named everybody. Like, how does that help us focus on the whom's? Like, to me, we just affirmed that, yes, this is what we're doing this for everybody in the universe.
Well, but we are also,
me out.
we're also parsing that. So if whatever we do is going to make something possible for the people with stories to tell, what does it make possible? Our next question, what does it make possible for people with stories to tell? If this is going to make something possible for people whose lives could be changed, what could those stories make possible for those people? So we could also ask, what does it make possible for everybody on the planet? We would eventually come down to that. We'd parse them out.
So this list basically gives our brains something to hold on to when we're coming up with the what does it make possible.
What this list does is make sure that we are not creating, to the best of our ability, unintended consequences. That we are being mindful that what we do is going to impact a whole lot more people than, well, it's just going to be whoever reads it and needs a story. Okay, well, who are those people? Wow, okay, this could be impacting people who are telling stories at their staff meeting. Oh, okay, what does that make possible for them? Ooh, yeah, okay. And just being really, it creates, Rebecca started out by saying this creates context.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the responsibility that comes with creating a structure that frees us from structure? It's like, like, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about structure, and it's like, that's like the opposite of what my philosophy is. It's like, everything that I've read so far in the Catalytic Thinking paper is that, the systems or the structure are kind of getting in our way. And it's like, but at some point you need to have something that's guiding a little bit. And that's like a weird paradox to try to figure out. But that's exactly the kind of language that I hear everybody using and talking about this challenge today. So I think that's good. I think it's exciting.
Well, what we find is that it's not that the structure is good or bad. Most things we find are neither good nor bad. They just are, and it's what we do with them. And what it is that the existing structures and systems we have are rooted in a set of assumptions that don't bring out the best in us. And so it's a matter of being more mindful about the questions and assumptions that we build those structures upon.
I might be jumping a little bit, but I had under what you were saying with the continuum of potential, how do we know where they are and how do we reach them? And it just occurred to me as well, who will they listen to?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Always looking at the byline before I read advice.
Yeah. Huge. That is going to be a big condition for success. What are their individual conditions? What do they need to know? What do they need to see? What do they need to have? So, Rebecca, do you have do we have a list of the for whom's? Anybody who's been listing them?
We certainly do. The world. No, just kidding. We have people with stories to tell, people, individual lives who could be impacted if they hear that story. people who will carry those stories forward to others. Then kind of parsed into 3 prongs, since people, the people who need the, I don't know, I'm coming, some synonyms are crazy. The people who need the not your usual thinking idea, the people who tried that idea and show that it's not off the charts, the people who said this might be a really wacky idea, but they said it. We have creating the future's mission and the importance of influencers in moving our mission forward. So that could also include institutional bodies seeking stories to perhaps ignite the approach they might take. There's a whole body of people who are looking for a thing. This was when we talked about idea-driven versus causality-driven. The people who want to replicate the doing. So many humans are looking for something that they can plug into what they're thinking they want. At Creating the Future, people who are developing our whole range of programs, stories play a huge role in all of that. People who need to hear stories, which then came into the whole continuum of potential. So that's maybe people who are frustrated and stuck. So they're not seeking a story, yet suddenly this resonates because it normalizes why they're feeling so frustrated. We have Hildy as the founder. This team, this whoever is working on to move this initiative forward. And for every one of these people, we also note, and all their ripples. So every single one of these for whom's has ripples.
Thank you.
So we can pick a certain whom and dive into that next. What will this make possible? And yes, we'll see that there will probably be some overlap around things that it makes possible for people, which is awesome when we see that, and some overlapping of conditions. Others will be maybe explicit to that group. Just noting this is all normal in the process of digging into the for whoms. Is there one group in particular you'd like to start with?
Let's start with the people who need to hear stuff, whether it is, I sort of parsed the, Cindy's, I got this crazy thing, and then the rejoinder to that of, that's the crazy thing I need, into people with stories to tell, including the people who've, here's this crazy thing I tried, which I think is absolutely a fabulous way to tell a story, by the way. I tried this thing that I thought was really bizarre, and here's what happened. And then the people who need the ideas being the people whose lives could be impacted by stories. They may just need that crazy idea, but it's, so I'd love to play with people whose lives, who have something. People who are going through something and are seeking an answer.
So I have a process question maybe. So
Yep.
what I just heard you say, Hildy, kind of smash together like four whom's on our list. Does that matter? Because I think what Rebecca said was that we're going to find that many people might be represented in multiple categories, and then the what makes possible might be the same. So we just pick one, right?
Yeah, and so I was just sort of looking at what does whatever we decide to do here make possible for people who are basically seeking answers to their own stuff. Well, they find answers to their own stuff. What else? What does this make possible for people who are reading this story because they're seeking to figure something out?
Inspiration. They get inspiration.
Similarly, other people asking the same, other people seeking the same answers.
Ooh. I'm not alone, sort of validation. Yeah. Ryan's feeling that we've been watching his life.
My Truman Show moment.
I think if they want, because I think this is connecting people to people if they want. So I think every story, I believe, needs an opportunity to connect to a human being or many human beings.
Yeah.
Courage.
Yeah.
New questions?
Yeah, there's something in that about I never thought of that takes you into a new direction.
I think there's something, because sometimes we'll hear these great stories, yet the "and" part is that it's explicitly perhaps showing me something I can bring into my life, like something I can, it could be that new direction with questions, it could be something I can try right now, like there's something that is relatable to my situation.
I'm witnessing right now you guys demonstrating this method that you've been using for a while, and I'm not sure what to say, but like I've run into so many situations where people just don't think like that. Like people have their own way that is vastly different than that, and I don't know how this fits into the conversation that we're having right at this second, but like I don't know, like I just like it's hard for me to imagine just a captive audience or like the conditions for where like people would just be open to behaving like this, you know, because I've seen so many examples of people just behaving badly, you know, and so I don't know, I'm waiting and seeing what happens here.
I feel like part of this, like this is the part that I look forward to seeing over and over again in the process, because I'm always like, oh yeah, I forgot this is how we do this. And when I look at this, you know, we just came up with what could this make possible for people seeking answers to their own questions. They get answers, inspiration, validation, connections to people if they want them, courage, new questions, something directly relatable to their life. So rather than my brain going, oh my God, we got even more work to do, like we don't have to think about how we're going to do it yet. And we don't have to think about all the people that won't be part of this, that won't see it. Like, this is the part where I'm like, oh yeah, I can just sit here and come up with this amazing, interesting list of basically, like, we don't know what that will look like, but that's, I think, the process, and that we don't have to believe it yet. We just have to dream it up. And so this is like my favorite part.
Yay! Yeah, it is so interesting. It's the we're so conditioned, again, systems. We're so conditioned to looking at a list of basically the plus one possibilities and going, yeah, that's not possible. We can't do that. We don't have time for that. Who's going to pay for that? Yeah, no. And just the permission to list it. Just the permission to list it. One of the things that I was adding to Cindy, your, I'm not alone validation kind of thing, is people can feel heard. And the number of times that I've read something somewhere, oh my God, maybe I'm not crazy, or maybe I am crazy and that other person's the exact same crazy as me. But there's something in there that can happen even just in a written story. It can happen in a paragraph.
I think with the opportunity to connect to a person, my connection may simply be reading, viewing, listening to what this thing is, that I am now connected to someone else. I can choose if I want my connection to go deeper, yet there's someone else in the world who thinks, whatever it is, I find some alignment in thinking, I feel some support, even if that other person doesn't even know how much your thinking supported me.
That's huge. That's huge. That's beyond the ability to connect to a person. What the stories create is the feeling of connection. I can't tell you the number of people who have approached me at some gathering of something and said, your book on so-and-so changed my life. And I've been reading your stuff for a decade and you have changed my life. I've never heard of them. I don't know who they are. And they're feeling that connection. So it's a difference between them reaching out and saying, yo, Hildy, I love this, and them feeling that connection, which, I'm thinking of you and you too. Bono, I don't know how to tell you this, baby, but Bono doesn't know who you are.
That's okay. And
you feel so connected to you too. Mm-hmm. And that, I think there's something there.
And that's also an opportunity for people, when we get to it, the people who are sharing their stories. Do you know you will change people's lives in your willingness to share stories? You may never even know who the people are who are reading what you're sharing, yet the potential is huge, and it's anywhere in the world. Your participation can make that possible.
Mm, mm, mm. So let's move to that, the people with stories to tell. What will this effort make possible for the people with stories to tell? And they may or may not be, quote, writers. That may not be this team. It may be we're interviewing them. What will this make possible for people with stories to tell?
I think it validates their experience that anybody cares, who would care to read it. This is very specific, but I run, as someone who has young kids, I run into it a lot in the birth stories. Just everybody's experience is different, but you find someone who has that experience that clicks with yours, and you're like, oh, it's okay to feel that way, or maybe telling my story will help someone feel better about theirs. I think that people knowing that there's a power in telling their stories, where a lot of times, either from family dynamics, and this isn't actually my personal experience, but from what I've heard and seen, some family dynamics or just societal things, it's like you're not supposed to talk about that, or you're not supposed to talk about you're not supposed to feel that way. And this is what people want to hear. You know, so I think there's a great power and release for people in having a place where they can say how they actually felt, or just hear from and know that that's okay. That might be one way to connect with people like Ryan was bringing up, who don't necessarily think in a sharing manner. Just to validate that their experience and their stories are worth listening to.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, oh, very much.
That's not a bullet point. That was a little bit more. But
Very much more.
I think it will also, with those people with stories to tell will learn how to practice. You know, kind of along building on what Cindy just said, is the power of telling their story, and they don't have to have it right the first time or the second time or the third time, that they get to play and practice in the telling of the story to then see what information is most useful to different people.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I mean, in that vein, like, I'm so used to telling stories live that there was one time that I was in, or a couple times I was in a like neighborhood art exhibition, which is like horrible art. I'm not a visual artist, but like but I had to sit there and watch people experience it. I had to be anonymous so that because I'm that's how I'm used to. I have to like hear it. I have to see how people react in order to make the art better. Yeah, I'm just getting to practice telling it. You know, the more that you actually like figuratively or literally behind the mic, I think you can really tell how it will affect people better, more deeply.
Wow. Yeah.
And also how it will affect yourself. Like, when I tell my story, it kind of taps into that, what you said earlier, Cindy, feeling the power of telling your own story. And so what else can they feel in that? Do they feel relief that they finally said it? Do they feel excited that they were able to articulate it? Like, there's so many things that they could get out of telling their story.
I'm thinking about how we begin every group interaction that we're doing, especially when it's going to be people together for a long time, asking people to share their journey, share their story, share the winding path that led them to today. And the fact that initially people sometimes are, I don't really know what to say because nobody's ever asked us to tell our story before. And
usually usually the winding path is what you're taught to not say in an interview. So like that.
Right, yeah, you know, and the let's just get down to business and the blah 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 blah, and so there's people who initially feel uncomfortable. There's people who don't know where to start, and then when they're done, are amazed at what they've learned about themselves just in the 5 minutes of telling their story. And I mean, there's so much that comes out of it because we're told exactly, Cindy, you know, don't tell your story. Just make it look like the bullet points of what you think is going to make you look good. But yeah, we systemically shy away from the story when it's so powerful. I read something. There's a bookstore in LA that is fabulous, independent bookstore. I go there every time I'm there, and they have an art annex that is because it's LA, so there's a whole screenwriter section. There's a whole, and so I always gravitate to the screenwriter section, and was there last weekend and found this tiny little book. It's called Do's Story: How to Tell Your Story So the World Listens. And I have 9 million writing books, and so I needed another one. But I found this quote in there that I think applies to this. The sole reason we tell stories is to connect in truth, to enable others to carry our fire forward. And I thought that was really, so we tell stories so that we'll connect with that core truth of whatever that story is. We'll feel that connection that's below the story that's below the story. So feeling that connection so that somebody else can bring that forward. And what they bring forward may not be the story. They may not tell, hey, I was talking to Cindy and she said blah, blah, but they may bring the essence of it forward in the way they're interpreting that. There's something there about the core truth behind the story that we get to. Sometimes we don't even know what that core truth is until we tell it and somebody else reads it and tells us.
I was thinking that a big part of all of this is it's one giant holding of the space for people of the world, because someone may not be holding any space for you, whoever you are, to listen to figure out what is my story and what is my truth versus the records that have been playing in my head. So I just think it's the potential to be heard and seen and held, creating and holding time and space for whoever you are.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is a less philosophical way to think about what do people's stories to tell get, but sometimes they just want that story out, and they just want to be known for that topic, you know? I mean, y'all know. Like,
personal branding.
yeah. So I think that's going to be some of that, or is motivation. So, you know, how is it positioned so that, or what are the conditions for that to be successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really gets to everybody's own motivation for telling their story.
And sometimes you don't have control over that either, like, because people are attracted to different stories. So I never expected to be the person who thinks Cat in the Hat, the book is creepy, but that's a story I told that a lot of people remember.
It broke up. Say it again.
No, I didn't necessarily set out to be the woman who thinks that the book, The Cat in the Hat, is creepy, but that resonated, and that's where a lot of people think of me. Right. So I find that part of it interesting. Maybe not necessarily ultimately the goal, obviously personal branding, but I think that will come up with different people wanting to tell stories. So, you know, what, again, like just going back to conditions that everyone's aware of. I'm trying to not get too specific because I don't actually have specifics on it, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I think that really looking at the fact that different people are going to have different motivations for telling stories. You know, there's going to be people who, for instance, want to tell stories of their professional success for their own personal, professional reason. So one of the most interesting things that I find, again, having the consultants community, is the number of people who also are in the catalytic thinking community that you guys are all in from the class, who only tell stories of the things they taught others to do. So I was in my class and I asked this question and my students loved it. And it's like, okay, how about you? And a story about you. Well, it is a story about me because here's one thing I did with a group I was facilitating and they loved it. And you know, okay, that's great. And understanding that people are telling their stories for different reasons. If our purpose is that the people reading the stories find answers, find inspiration, find validation, feel connected, then, and we set systems for that, then the consultant who really wants to feel good about what they facilitated, so long as it's within that system and it creates that inspiration, fabulous. So yeah, but I think it's really important, Cindy, just acknowledging that different people have different motivations for telling different stories. Yeah. And for choosing the stories they tell.
Oh, that's, yeah, creating their own narrative in a way.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, in a more positive way, I think some people will, with stories to tell, will just want the feedback or want the comments. Not necessarily specific ones.
I think it comes, I think that comes back full circle to the, am I crazy?
Right.
You know, the whole holding space and normalizing. So that personal motivation as well.
I think when you get to share your story there, this may go in different motivation. It's a sense of pride for you. You have shared your story and it's out there for the world. You can point to it. I'm part of something here.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you submit a story and then there is crickets chirping, because we will build systems in place that will ensure that people feel good and comfortable and seen and heard, not just, you know, throughout their journey with us.
Yeah, I on the flip side of that, I think that there's also power in being able to share your story anonymously. I think that this is really important, and I'm not comfortable putting my name on it. So it is, and again, coming down to different people's motivations.
So that's creating the whole, you choose to participate in whatever way is comfortable with you, and
Right.
and making those available in the system.
Which is definitely a condition for success for people. You know, how many times I'm in a conversation with somebody and I go, oh, wow, that is so awesome. Would you feel comfortable sharing that? And they go, yeah, not really. Okay. What if it were completely anonymous? I'll write something, see if this works. And they go, oh, yeah, okay. I'm comfortable with that. And sometimes they don't even realize the lesson that's in it. They're sharing something because it was whatever, they don't even realize it's coming back to that truth thing. They don't even realize the truth in the story that they've told, the power in the story that they've told you, whether in confidence or just as a friend or as a whatever. It really is, there's something, I think it's in both the telling of the stories, but it's also in really the people who are reading the stories. Is just that feeling of shared humanity, that we're all the same. It really has to do with that connection, that feeling of connection, that sense of connection. But there's something about being able to just breathe a little bit, that normalizing, that validation. So now let's go to the judgy place. What does this make possible for people who will be taking the stories and sharing them with other people? So whether they're doing it from a stage, whether they're doing it as they're, recruiting people to their company, whether they're doing it as a teacher in a class or as evidence to somebody, or just, hey, I read this story that's exactly like what you're going through. Sort of that second ripple of people who are actually going to carry the story forward to somebody else. What will this make possible for people who are going to carry the stories forward to somebody else? That are leaving a printout of it anonymously on their boss's chair.
I was just gonna say it'll give them like an easy, out of the box story. Like they don't have to think it up. It's a tool, an easy tool that they can use.
What will they be using these stories for? An easy tool for what?
To get their point across, this is a whole other thing, right? To educate, to like sharing a new way of thinking with someone else. To teach, like if it's someone that they mentor or they're the boss of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That they can influence. They want to influence
Mm-hmm.
someone's
Mm-hmm.
action.
Mm-hmm. What will our having these stories available in a whole bunch of different ways make possible for people who are carrying that story forward to somebody else?
It's demonstrating that whatever it is possible. Gets to the evidence.
That it would be community building on itself.
Talk more.
People like, you come into a group and you see people sharing in that manner, and you're not used to that, and then you take that and you share it with somebody else. Like, it just seems like it would have a exponential effect,
Oh yeah. Yes.
I don't even know how you manage something like that. I mean, if it's really successful, it's just like exploding. Like, I don't know how you even keep track of that, and like, or you even want to.
Well, I'm thinking of the number of times that people will say, oh wow, I never thought about doing the storytelling in our staff meetings. And so they're hearing about somebody who did that in their staff meeting, and they're immediately then taking it to their staff meeting. So it's creating the ripples. It's the candle lighting the candle.
I think the ripples are the reason why you can't see the answer. You know, it's just so complex that it's amazing, you know, if something happens like that, but to be able to try to model it or explain it is, I'm going to say, impossible or pretty damn hard.
I hope not, because that's what we're doing. But, and I think that is part of that, like in people experiencing whatever this will be, they will be given the words, or they will understand that what they're doing is important, and it is important for them to then loop back and tell their story of the story back to the like the being, you know, back to all of us, because they experience how much the story helps them. And so they learn that telling the story is part of the community, and then they are then given the tools to tell the story back to the community. And our tool, the thing that we're making, is what's going to allow them to do that. So it will allow them to both learn about how to do it and give them the way to do it. And then that, by doing that, you're helping them empower themselves to, you know, to step into their own power, and to, because sometimes you're walking along like you don't even know what you're doing, and then someone tells you like, oh my God, you totally changed my life that day I ran into you on the street and you said, oh, that shirt looks really cool with your eyes. And, you know, like, wow, you know, so by giving them that, the thing that they can then flip back on themselves and say, wow, I just did that. And I have a responsibility to tell everyone else about it now.
I just had the most doing of doing ideas that I scribbled down and I'm setting aside. But can you imagine if at the end of every news story or any story that we do, one of the questions is, how would you tell this story in your own words?
Mm-hmm. Talk about a big fat database.
and you know, getting to Ryan's point about, it's easy to model this. And it's easy to create the ripples. What isn't easy is to track it and to monitor what happens with it. And we're okay with that. That the need to monitor and quantify, and to stick all of those ripples into a database, Laura. You know, we're not going to. We're not going to, and that's okay. That's okay. Yeah, it's one of the reasons that it's been very, very interesting, and this, I think this is also about this. We've been shifting in the question of evaluation. And people are always asking, how are you going to know if you're successful? And my favorite answer to that question when it comes to really transformational change, there's the guy who, at least when I interviewed him for my podcast, he was the head of the New Orleans Community Foundation. And I interviewed him, I think it was 5 years after Katrina. And he had come out of, he's been in foundation work forever. He'd come out of foundation work, I believe, in the DC area. And, you know, foundations are the ones who are constantly asking you to measure the difference you made. And I don't remember how it came to, I'll have to re-listen to the podcast because we have it. But it came to the conversation around evaluation. And he said, you know, it makes me crazy when people are looking at what are the metrics you're going to use to evaluate the change in a neighborhood? He said, the metric I want to see is you're going to walk around and it's going to feel different. And I always loved that. And so what we've been looking at, rather than the metrics and the measuring and all of that stuff, is what if our entire, and again, when people are asking this, they're frequently saying, A, how will you know if you're successful? And B, how will people who are funding this know that their money was well spent? And C, we evaluate to learn. And frequently, C, the learning, is the overarching and yet the subterfuge, because really it's just because somebody told you needed to count things. And what we've been focusing on is, what if our whole purpose for being is to learn and to share what we learn? So you got the learning thing, and we're sharing what we learn. And then why would we need to evaluate? Why would we need to say, well, because then you wind up saying 20 people took our class. So there's what and I guess this is about the mission, what this makes possible for our mission, but it really shifts the mission from a whole bunch of things we do to our whole job is to learn what works to bring out the best in people and create systems that bring out the best in people, and to share that. And that the stories are our mission. I'm babbling, I'll stop.
Well, I feel like, again, once we get to the doing, it's almost like it frees us up. What you just said frees us up to say, okay, we're going to have one example of all the kinds of, along the continuum of potential, we're going to have one story about this in this format, in this way. And that's really all we have to start with, in some kind of way. And then it becomes, well, what we're actually creating is a way for people, some way for people to get the story, pull it out, look at it, read it, hear it, experience it, and then share what they learn back to the Borg in a way, and they'll create their own content, like we've talked about before. They're going to create their own stories like that, and they're going to want to be able to share them. So really that's our task eventually, is to, what's the fastest, easiest, most flexible way we can teach people to share their stories. And then what they're actually sharing is going to change as they learn more about the continuum, more about catalytic listening and catalytic thinking, catalytic everything. And then they'll tell different stories, or they'll edit their stories. Like, maybe we need a giant wiki, like who knows what it will turn out to be. But like, that's really, like, how can we get out of our own way so that it just creates itself?
And on that thread as well, how do we make sure that they're not, that it doesn't fall into a Facebook algorithm, so they're only hearing stories that reinforce?
So one of the things that this then will make possible for people who are seeking answers to their own stuff, you had noted new questions, and the I never thought of that. We talked about finding answers and finding stuff I can do right now, but also finding different perspectives, different ways to think about this thing. And again, that comes along the continuum. There's people who just want the answer to the question I'm asking. How do I do this? And I want 3 things that I can do right now. And then there's the people who have tried that 17 times, it didn't work, and they're ready to start maybe putting a toe in the water of, I want to, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's a new way of thinking about this, and I don't even know where to start finding that. And that's the opposite of the Facebook algorithm. It is 10 minutes till. And we'll continue this conversation the next time. It's time to take a moment and reflect, and the first thing that I want to share before we dive into it is I didn't think I was going to last the whole meeting, and this just took me out of my body enough that so I'm feeling deeply grateful. If you guys took any notes, I know I'm talking to writers about taking notes. If you guys took any notes, if you have any thoughts, let's just take a deep breath, listen to ourselves, and think about what is standing out to you from our conversation. It could be something that you're noticing, a thought that you hadn't had before. It could be something concrete. It could be a doing thing. It could be just how you're feeling. And let's just take a moment and reflect on what is standing out to you from our time together today.
I spoke probably half as much as I did the last meeting, and I feel twice as energized. So that must be positive progress. That's what I'm taking from this. I will have ideas. I will have lots of ideas. But I got something out of this.
I feel like as someone who is typically doing marketing about for whom, that we rarely take the amount of time and care to parse it out like this. Yeah.
Cool.
Or rarely with this many people as well.
This many people in our room, or this many people in the list of for whom's?
In our room.
Mm-hmm.
Both, but specifically I was thinking in our room.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like I'm getting happier and happier with the process, like instead of, because I mean, when Rebecca said this is one giant holding of the space for the people of the world, like the doer part of me was like, holy crap, see, it's too big, too much. 5 of us, we can't do this. And then I remembered that I could let that go and enjoy the process. And I find it easier each time. I find it easier to get back to that space of this, enjoy this time together. And it's so creative, and I love reading the lists of what people are going to get out of it. And I don't have to solve the problem or come up with the right piece of software. Like I've said that before, but it's like, this really hit home this time of like, oh yeah, here we are, and we're right where we're supposed to be.
I was thinking of several things you said throughout the meeting, Laura, specifically around, I think, the doing of yes, we're going, the reality is this could impact all of humanity. It has the potential to create a sea change. That can also be like, oh my gosh, how are we creating something? Yet knowing that as we go in the process, we're going to say, touched on a couple examples in the meeting, Laura, of we can carve out this and we're going to build it right now. So it's not like in a year from now, we're going to launch something, because the reality is this has been the drumbeat for years at creating the future and in the world for a long time. So we'll get to the place where we're going to say, yes, we've created the conditions for success that will allow for scale and flex and all of that. And we're going to start in the documenting, capturing, and sharing of stories now. So I was thinking on that, and I was thinking in the terms of continuum of potential, anyone who we're inviting and welcoming to contribute or to try are all really at the I'll try something new stage, because currently the norm is not to request or invite someone to participate in whatever way feels meaningful to them, and to ultimately potentially share a story or just cruise around, show up and participate however you wish. So for anyone, including each of us, trying something new.
And how clunky trying something new always feels, regardless of what the thing is that we're trying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm just feeling massively energized. I'm also eventually, when it comes down to choosing which actions to take, we will prioritize which actions to take, and it may be one action. With that, we'll have the entire context built so that when we either have more people or have more whatever, or we're ready for the next action, we don't have to go through all of this. We've got it all built already and can say, oh, but here are the conditions that we're seeking to create. And here's 17 different actions we could use to do that. We're choosing this one right now, and we're going to choose this one next, and we're going to choose that one next. And we don't have to do it all. And I can guarantee we won't, because we are only human, no matter how many humans we are. This just always is, I love thinking about the for whoms and what it makes possible for them. And it is the direct, well, it's not necessarily opposite, but it is a very different approach than, as you mentioned, Cindy, the marketing approach, which is be very clear about your target audience and who you want to impact and how you want to impact them and what you want them to do and what you're going to ask them to do. And this is acknowledging that there's people outside your target audience that are going to be impacted. There's going to be ridiculously stupid 20-year-olds who are going to eat Tide Pods. They're not your target audience, but something's going to happen with them. There's going to be toddlers who are going to eat Tide Pods, and you're creating something that looks like candy. And without asking the, what is creating something that looks like candy going to make possible and for whom, then we wind up with frat boys eating Tide Pods and thinking that that's cool. I've got nothing. But yeah, I love this. I love this part of the conversation, although I love all these parts of the conversation, because they are about what's possible. So I'm grateful to all of you guys, and I'm grateful for you taking me out of my body and into my head for this 2 hours. So thank you for that. And Rebecca, you're in charge for next time. I'm out of here. I'm having some minor surgery in the next week or so. So I will.
Well, we'll take a look at calendars, because we'll see where it's fitting for the next time to come back together with everyone. So I'll send out a scheduling email that's, getting a sense of what's going on in your life. Not that you have to share all that, but that will then, we'll figure out when our next meeting is. And for everyone to think about, we didn't touch on this for whom yet. We've talked about it before, about what everyone wants to step into meaningful to you. So specifically at the next meeting, if we can explore, perhaps we'll start with the whom of each of us. So if you think about, what does this sharing stories make possible for you, because we're going to then create conditions around what this will make possible for everyone individually and as a team.
Well, and what that also raises, Rebecca, is that we're going to want to talk about what will, and this is a very doing thing, what will we do to document and share the story of what we're doing here. So, and we get to say goodbye to Bashi. Bye-bye, honey pie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's good to see you guys. Thank you all.
Take care.
See you next time.
Talk soon.
Hi.
Hi.